There's one thing I've realized during my own experience as a doctor. It's the realization that doctors are some of the busiest people I know. We do not have a lot of time. We do not have a lot of energy. No doubt about it, right? But unfortunately, being busy and being productive are not the same thing. In fact, some of the least productive periods of my own life were also some of the busiest. I remember going through stretches where every day felt full. I'd get to the end of the week feeling exhausted. My calendar remained packed. My inbox was overflowing with emails. I was constantly moving from one thing to another. And yet, if somebody had asked me what meaningful progress I'd actually made during that month, I probably would have struggled to answer. If someone asked me if I was happy, I'd say yes. If they ever asked me twice, though, I'd probably say no, which they didn't. So that's a frustrating place to be, especially when you're somebody who genuinely cares about improving other parts of your life, not just your career as a doctor. Somebody who has identity outside of medicine. Because you start wondering where all your time is going. You start wondering why you're working so hard in the first place without feeling like you're actually moving forward and feeling fulfilled doing it. And over the years, I've realized that this experience is surprisingly common among doctors. Not because doctors are lazy, not because we don't work hard. In fact, it can often be the opposite. Quite often, it's because we are directing enormous amounts of effort towards things that don't even meaningfully move your lives forward. So what I want to do in this video is share a handful of lessons that have had a huge impact on my own performance and on the performance of many of the doctors and founders that I've worked with. None of these are hacks. None of these require waking up at 4 a.m. None of them involve cold plunging in the Arctic Ocean. They're simply observations and principles that will show you how easy it is to make a difference in your life when you actually have a discipline you can stick to. So take your pens out, make some notes, let's get started. The first lesson came from a mistake I kept making over and over again. Every month I'd sit down with a fresh notebook, a fresh burst of motivation, and a completely unrealistic view of what was about to happen. I'd convince myself that this was finally the month where every area of my life was going to improve all at once, all at the same time. My training would become perfect, my sleep would become perfect, work would go brilliantly, and I'd read more books. I'd spend more time with friends, I'd become more organized, I'd build better habits, and somehow I'd do all of this all at the same time while working in medicine. For about 30 minutes, it felt fantastic, I felt excited, I felt ambitious. Then reality would arrive pretty soon. Maybe it's a difficult week, a stressful shift, a shift that runs on late, or that moment I go on nights and I just don't have the energy anymore. My plan suddenly started collapsing in front of my eyes. What eventually changed things for me was realizing that every month needed a center of gravity, one thing, one area that matters more than anything else. That doesn't mean other areas stop existing or you neglect them as such. It doesn't mean your health suddenly becomes irrelevant if that's not your main priority. It simply means that if this month goes well, you know exactly what success looks like. One thing I've noticed repeatedly among the founders that I've worked with is that they are often remarkably clear among what matters right now. Not next year, not 5 years from now, but right now, what's their next most important action? This sort of clarity allows them to direct energy instead of constantly scattering it. And honestly, I think most doctors would benefit enormously from adopting this same mindset. Another lesson that completely changed how I work came from understanding attention. Now, attention sounds like one of those abstract concepts people talk about on podcasts, but it has very real consequences because whether you realize it or not, your attention is being trained every day. Every notification you respond to, every email you immediately open, every time you switch between tasks, even every time you interrupt yourself, you're teaching your brain something. You're teaching it what normal feels like. One of the reasons so many doctors struggle to focus deeply isn't because they're incapable of focusing. Obviously we are. We got to where we are from putting those long hours in, learning lectures at med school, passing exams. We know how to direct attention. But when we start working, it becomes a whole new challenge. It's because the hospital, our environment, our working environment is constantly causing us to be in a reactive state, reacting to things. You're interrupted throughout the day, you're responding all day, you're switching contexts all day. Nurses are coming up to you asking for certain things. Other colleagues, other doctors are saying, patients get sick, things change. You're constantly in a state of reacting, not proactive. Your attention is constantly being stolen, essentially. So one of the most useful things I ever did was start deliberately creating periods where my attention only had one job. The best time to do this was outside of work, when I wasn't on call, or maybe when I had a 10-minute lunch break. No notifications, no messages, no emails, just one task. At first, it felt surprisingly uncomfortable. My brain wanted stimulation. It was used to that. It wanted high speed. It wanted novelty. It wanted something easier. It was used to these, quick dopamine spikes, this cortisol spikes, this high alertness state. It wanted something easier. It almost felt boring to just sit and decrease that stimulation. But after a few weeks, I noticed a surprising benefit. Tasks that used to take 2 hours suddenly took 40 minutes, not because I became smarter, but because I was finally giving my full attention to what I was doing. Now, obviously, this is something I go much deeper into in my personal program. If you want to work with me one-on-one, we can identify your personal bottlenecks and get you implemented on the right path straight away. If you want to do that, click the link in the description and let's book a call. So many people assume they have a motivation and discipline problem when in reality their attention has simply become fragmented over years of constant stimulation and interruption. The process of rebuilding that capacity is something we spend a lot of time on, because once attention improves, almost every other area of performance tends to improve alongside it. Once you have the ability to fully focus on one thing at one time, that's basically a superpower in today's modern age. So another lesson that took me embarrassingly long to learn is that your brain should not be carrying everything. I used to walk around with hundreds of unfinished thoughts or open loops in my subconscious, even things I wasn't fully aware of but were just kind of lingering, making me feel stressed, making me feel incomplete, just floating around my head. Things I needed to remember, things I needed to do maybe the next day, things I needed to worry about. But I was carrying them because I hadn't written them down, because I hadn't closed the loop. And again, I wasn't actively thinking about it. It was just happening at the back of my mind. One concept from neuroscience that's incredibly useful here is the idea that the brain pays attention to unresolved things. When something remains unfinished, your brain keeps a small part of its resources allocated to remembering it. One thing isn't a problem because you can generally be aware of that. But the problem happens when you're carrying 5, 6, or 7 of these things, or even 50 things. Imagine that. It can become mentally exhausting. So whenever I start feeling mentally cluttered, chaotic in my mind, or just a low-grade sense of stress, I do something incredibly simple. I sit down with a blank piece of paper and write down everything on my mind. Literally anything. It could be things that aren't even that important or aren't even stressing me out, but the goal here is to identify the things that actually are important, the things that are stressing me out, and writing them down solves a lot of that baggage, a lot of that problem. And every single time I do this, I feel better afterwards, not because the problems disappear or because they're dealt with, but because I've stopped asking my brain to hold this simultaneously, and instead I'm actually aware of them and I've delegated it to a different system. I've offloaded it off my brain onto a piece of paper. So it's reducing the amount of unnecessary mental load that they're carrying every day. This worked for me. So the next lesson comes from something I learned the hard way while rebuilding my own health. And it's that productivity has a biological foundation. I know that's not particularly exciting. I know everybody wants the secret app, that productivity hack, the secret system or the secret morning routine. But after working with founders, executives, and doctors, I've noticed some similar patterns. I've become convinced that performance becomes incredibly difficult when the biological foundations aren't there. I used to treat sleep, training, recovery, and health as things I'd focus on once everything else was handled. The problem was that everything else was never handled. There was always busy parts of my life. There was always things to do. There was always excuses to be more productive, to require more from me. There was always another project. So what I realized was that these things are never going to go away. Performance kept getting pushed further down the priority list. What finally changed in my mind was noticing this pattern. Every time my sleep changed, deteriorated, my decision making deteriorated. Every time my training became inconsistent, stress felt heavier. I was less resilient, I had less energy, and every time my recovery disappeared, focus became harder. At some point, it became impossible to ignore this connection. The reason I mention this is because a lot of doctors are trying to optimize performance while neglecting the systems that produce performance. It's a little bit like trying to improve the quality of a building while ignoring the foundations underneath it. Eventually, these foundations determine everything. The final lesson I want to leave you with is probably the simplest. Stop constantly asking whether you're doing enough. Start asking whether you're doing the right things consistently. Because one thing I've noticed from working with successful people is that they're often less obsessed with intensity than everybody assumes. They're obsessed with consistency. And it really makes sense. Like, what is the point of putting 100% into one activity, being super good at it for a few weeks or a month even, and then fully dropping off? And that's what I find really consistent people to be good at. They understand that extraordinary outcomes are usually a result of ordinary actions repeated for an exceptionally long period of time, a period of time that almost becomes boring and automatic. And that's actually good news, because consistency is learnable, it's trainable, it's a skill you can easily be good at. You don't need to become a different person, you don't need superhuman discipline or intensity, you just need clarity, you need systems, and you need an environment that supports good decisions. And you need enough patience to allow those decisions to compound over time. If you can do this, productivity becomes far less complicated than most people make it. If you find this helpful, and if you'd like help improving your health, energy, performance, and execution as a high performer doctor, you'll find information about working with me in the description. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you on the next one.